Hi everyone, I'm an Egyptologist and I answer your ancient Egypt questions. Egypt is the oldest country in the world. It was founded in around 3100 BC. We're often told that King Menes, or King Min, founded ancient Egypt, but how true is that? Did such a king really exist? I'm here to tell you. From a very young age, we Egyptians learn in school that King Menes from Upper Egypt went north and defeated his lower Egyptian enemies, thus founding the oldest nation state in the world, ushering into Egypt's historical period that would see the building of pyramids, tombs, and everything else that ancient Egypt is so famous for. But unfortunately, the reality is that actually it's so much more complex than that. The founding of ancient Egypt was something that took hundreds of years. With a lot more research and more archaeological discoveries, Egyptologists have been able to determine that it was a gradual process of cultural assimilation, economic dominance, and also a lot of warfare involved as well. But it wasn't as simple as the south, Upper Egypt, defeated the north in this big momentous clash. It was never as simple as that. In fact, there's no actual archaeological evidence. No bodies have been discovered, for example, that exhibit evidence of violence. That's not to say that there was none. Remember, as I always say, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. There are a lot of there's a lot of art, pictorial evidence that shows warfare, but that doesn't mean that that was the only factor involved. It's also, you can also look at it as a topos, right? It's a subject matter in art for a thing that exists, but not necessarily an actual depiction of reality. So, on the one hand, the reality is never as simple as there was this big momentous clash between these two kingdoms where the south defeated the north. But on the other hand, also the historicity of King Menes himself is actually doubted. But if so, where did this King Menes come from? If ancient Egypt was founded around 3100 BC, there's a source 1700 years later. Really picture that. 1700 years later, from the time of Ramses II in the 19th dynasty, that actually mentions Min. Much, much later than anything contemporary. Nothing from the first dynasty actually mentions King Min or Menes. So what is this source from the 19th dynasty? In Abydos, that's the cult center of the god Osiris, north of Luxor in the south of Egypt. There, in the Temple of Seti I, which you have to go see by the way, magnificent temple. In that temple, on one of its walls, is a king list that shows all the kings from, well, not all the legit ones, shall we say, from the very first dynasty down to Ramses II. And at the very head of this list is King Min. So you might ask, well, clearly, there you go. The ancient Egyptians mention King Min. So how can we even suggest that he's not a historical figure? Well, on the one hand, like I said, there's the fact that this is 1700 years after Menes supposedly would have reigned. And we know that mistakes can be made, miscopies, and things like that. But also, there's also the glaring fact that there's nothing that mentions Min from the first dynasty. Also, there are lots of explanations, but the most creative one might very well be that King Min is in fact not a historical king at all, but actually, um, he's this made-up historical figure. Let me explain. So one of the suggested origins for the name Min is from the ancient Egyptian word menu, which means, guess what? So-and-so, or someone. So the idea is that the ancient Egyptians knew that Upper and Lower Egypt were once separate, and that they must have been unified at some point, and that someone must have done it at some point, but they just forgot who it was, or they don't know who it was, because it just, even by their standards, it's such an ancient event. So they went, well, we'll just call him King so-and-so. King so-and-so unified Upper and Lower Egypt and founded our glorious kingdom. And this is not a joke, by the way. This is an actual, seriously considered theory. But there are other explanations as well. Maybe Min actually comes from the verb many, which means to endure. So, he's the enduring one. But then why are there no sources that mention him? And even if there were a source to mention him, where did this idea of a big war between the two halves of the country come from? For that, we have to talk a little bit about King Narmer. In the Egyptian Museum, in Tahrir Square, one of the first objects you will see as you enter is truly one of the treasures of that museum, the Narmer Palette. This is from the first dynasty, from the dawn of Egyptian history. And here, on the front, you can see the king, unmistakable, because, he's center stage, he's by far the largest figure, and he's doing something that is iconic of ancient Egyptian art. He's holding his enemy with one hand, and with the other, he's holding a weapon, in this case a mace, and he's about to strike him. This is what Egyptologists call the smiting scene. You can see it from even before this, from ancient Egypt's prehistoric period, and you can see it on even the very last major ancient Egyptian temples ever built. So the king here, he's wearing what's called the white crown. It's the crown that's associated with Upper Egypt. Upper Egypt referring to the south of the country, because it's quite literally higher up. It's on a higher altitude than the north of the country, where the delta is, Lower Egypt. So he's holding clearly an enemy that is visibly different from him, right? He's got a beard, so he's Lower Egyptian. We know that through various other symbolism that you can see on this incredible artifact. And on the other side, you can see the king in clearly what is a victory procession. You can see beheaded enemies. And in this case, the king is wearing the red crown that's associated with Lower Egypt. So really, it's because of these, really because of the symbolism that you see on this artifact primarily, that the classic theory is King Narmer, this king from the south of the country, went north and defeated his enemies and thus founded Egypt. So on the one hand, clearly that must have been some kind of, foundational act. And on the other hand, you've got the king list that mentioned Min at the beginning. So the theory is Narmer and Min, Menes, are in fact one and the same. How true is that? Well, I should explain that ancient Egyptian kings, had an entire titulary, 5 names. At least that's how it is starting around the Middle Kingdom. That's when really the whole thing is standardized. So it was starting around 2000 BC. During the First Dynasty, we only have, from contemporary sources, 1 name, which is called the Horus name. So Narmer is a Horus name. Den and Ka and a lot of other kings like that from the First Dynasty, these are all their Horus names. So one explanation is that, well, Min isn't this made-up semi-historical figure whose name means so-and-so, or he's just simply, given that he's the first king, he's the enduring one, nothing like that. Min is actually King Narmer in disguise. It's King Narmer under a different name that was applied to him later in history when you had other names. Remember that king list in Abydos? All the names that appear on that list are what's called the king's throne names. So Ramses on there isn't named Ramses. He's named Usermatre Setepenre. So for consistency, so the theory goes, they didn't put in Narmer because that's a Horus name. You can't have on the same list one king listed with his Horus name, another king listed with his throne name. No. You gotta have them all with throne names. So that's one idea. And it's a very good one. But is there actually anything to indicate that Narmer and Min were in fact one and the same? Well, recent archaeological discoveries give some tantalizing hints as to actually that might be true. In Abydos, that same place, lies the cemetery, the royal cemetery of the First Dynasty. That's where the first kings of Egypt, and even their predecessors in the proto-dynastic period, are buried. There, 2 seal impressions were discovered. Both of them have lists of kings on them. Both of them date to the First Dynasty. So they have lists of First Dynasty kings on them. And at the head of each of these lists is Narmer. So based on this fact, from evidence that dates to the First Dynasty itself, and based on even later sources which clearly demonstrate that the ancient Egyptians themselves regarded King Narmer as some kind of foundational figure. His reign, there's a before and there's an after. He was at a crucial juncture in ancient Egyptian history. So if equally from ancient Egyptian sources we have Min heading the list, you can very easily make the argument, you can make a very strong case that Min and Narmer are actually one and the same. So to wrap things up, did King Min exist? There's no solid evidence for it. There's no proof. Were King Min and Narmer one and the same? You can make a very strong case for it, but still no proof. But did Upper and Lower Egypt become unified in a great big battle, as the old classic theory goes? No, that's not true. Well, I hope that clarifies this point, and I'll see you next time.